In a healthy home, the understanding is there that your needs are just as important as my needs. One's not better than the other. We're both equal. And so we are going to learn how to love each other in a way that your needs get met and my needs get met. Sometimes, though, I will have to sacrifice my needs in order to meet your needs, and sometimes you'll sacrifice your needs to meet mine, but overall, it'll be equal still. But what happens in complex trauma is very different. Complex trauma always will have somebody in the leadership position who abuses authority, who has narcissistic tendencies, who's a narcissist. And so when a narcissist has a family, a child, at first they're very excited because they want to show this child off, because it creates these warm feelings inside of them. They feel love, and they love getting hugged by the child. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But after a while, this child, their needs don't go away. They have lots of needs. They need time. They need attention. They need the parent to make sacrifices, to go without sleep sometimes. And to a narcissist, they don't like that. That's cramping their style. That's keeping them from having everything the way they want it. They like it. And so sadly, what can happen in many homes is that the narcissist distorts reality and says to the child, you're being selfish for having needs. Instead of admitting that they, the parent, are being selfish and not wanting to sacrifice, they twist it and tell the child, you're being selfish. And so the child begins to get the message that they're a burden, that they're making life inconvenient for the people caring for them. And so they begin to develop this shame. I don't like feeling like I'm making everybody else's life miserable. That must mean I'm a terrible person. And so it begins to do a lot of damage because the child is always feeling that they're a burden. So let me give you 18 questions, a little test, to see if you have the characteristics of a person who sees themselves as potentially being a burden, or who's afraid of being a burden to others. So, number 1, you find it very hard to ask for help. Number 2, you're afraid that you'll inconvenience people if you ask them for help. 3, you're afraid to burden people with your problems. You're afraid to put too much on people who are already busy and have their own situations to deal with. Number 5, you think that everyone is just too busy for you, or they all have their own problems, they just don't have time for me. You don't think you are a priority or you're worthy of other people's time or energy. You're not that valuable. Or you never want to be too much for people because they might abandon you if they find you're just too much. Or you are afraid to look weak, or to look dependent, or to look needy. That would be a terrible thing to reveal. Or some go this way. I am proud. I am a strong, independent person. And you pride yourself on how self-sufficient you are. Or you were trained, or you trained yourself to conclude that the goal in life and the sign of being healthy is to not need anybody, to be self-sufficient. Or as a child, you were validated for taking on lots of responsibilities and never asking for help. You were always helping others. You were super responsible, and that's what got you validation. So now you could not reveal need or weakness. You think people will judge you if you ask for help. They'll think you're incompetent to do things on your own. Or you've convinced yourself that you don't have needs. You've shut down so much internally, you're not even aware of your own needs. If you meet somebody and they talk about how tired they are or how busy they are or that they're having a hard day, you then go, okay, I can't ask that person anything. I can't share honestly about what's going on in my life because then I'll be a burden to them. So you shut it down. Now, what's the result of this internally? Is you often feel abandoned. You often feel that nobody really cares for you. Or you grow up and you're more alert to the needs of others than you are to your own needs. You can tell what everybody else in the room needs. You just don't know what you need. When you have a need and you need help to get that need met, instead of admitting it to yourself, what you tell yourself is the only reason you have that need and think you need others is because you're weak, you're lazy, you're just too tired, you're having a bad day. So you can't be honest with yourself that you need others. You explain it in different ways. Finally, you conclude that the reason you have needs is because you're lazy. So, 18 characteristics. How did you do? So if you say, wow, I have this problem, that leads us to the next question. Where did it come from? What caused it? So let me give you a couple things. The first one is it has to do with our parents. And I want to give you 18 characteristics of parents that can produce this fear of being a burden in a child. So number one, you had a narcissistic parent who taught you that you were selfish for asking for anything. And we just talked about that. Or you had a parent who sighed or rolled their eyes whenever you asked for anything. Or you had a parent who was sick or depressed and they couldn't take care of you and you felt like a burden to them. Or you had a workaholic parent who was always stressed out all the time and became exasperated whenever some new situation came up, and that included if you were to ask for anything. Or you had a parent who was so focused on looking good, their image, that negative emotions like a child crying, a child being afraid, a child having a need and expressing it was perceived as weakness. It made them look bad as a parent, that they weren't doing their job, so they shamed you and made you feel guilty for crying or showing fear. Or you had a parent who was great with all the other kids in the neighborhood and was always spending time doing fun stuff with them, but didn't seem to have time for you. Or you had a parent who parentified you, who relied on you for emotional support instead of relying on their spouse. And so now you can't have a problem where you have to rely on them. Or when you asked a parent for something, they made it all about them. They then went, don't you know how busy I am? Don't you know how many responsibilities I have? Don't you know how difficult my life is? All of a sudden it became all about them. Or you had a parent who never tried to understand you and your needs, never got you. Or you had a parent who, without you even realizing it, made you feel invisible, wanted you to not have needs, encouraged you, validated you for not having needs. They made you invisible, so you had to be unseen and unheard. Or parents who made a child a hero, and that child always had to be super responsible, could never have needs but had to meet the needs of others. Or you had a parent that expected you to learn a new skill the first time you attempted it, and you had to do it perfectly the first time. If you didn't, if you failed, if you did a so-so job, they became impatient with you. Or you had parents that said you only need family. You don't need anybody else. And you shouldn't need anybody else. Or you had parents who taught you, don't tell others about our family problems. We don't air our dirty laundry. So you just keep all those negative things inside of you and never share them with anybody. Or you had a parent who always played the victim, who was always super needy, who was always, poor me, oh, I got a bad headache today, oh, I'm feeling depressed today, oh, I'm feeling so tired today. And you hated having a parent like that, and we're determined never to be like that. Or if you asked a parent for something or shared that you were struggling, all of a sudden they started crying and they got depressed because they would go, I'm such a terrible parent. If I was a good parent, you wouldn't be having all these problems. And they just get all down on themselves. Or you grew up with a single parent and you had siblings, and your mom or your dad was so exhausted by the end of the day, they could hardly move off the couch, and you never wanted to bother them. Or, final one, you had a parent who always had something new they complained about. Some new problem, some new illness, some new stress in their life. So if you had a parent like that, I hope you can see you would end up feeling like a burden because of what that parent communicated. But then there's some other scenarios that could create this for you as a child. If you had parents who were both playing the victim, a narcissist, an enabler, and you had to try to parent your siblings, you had to parent your parents, you had to be the responsible one in the family, then you were caring for everybody else's needs, but you couldn't have needs of your own. Or if you had a family where there's constant fighting, conflict, anger, tension, often a child thinks the way to help my family is to not have needs. Because when I have needs, it just creates more anger and tension. Or maybe you were a child who was a burden because you had a chronic illness. You were a sick child. And you saw the toll it took on your parents. And you never want to be that to anybody else today. So those all feed into an attitude that says, I never want to be a burden.